Good evening. I'm Jim Lehrer in Washington.
And I'm Robert MacNeil in New York. After the news summary this Thursday, House Speaker Tom Foley talks about congressional scandals and public reaction. Next, the return of a once-controlled disease, tuberculosis. We have a documentary report and excerpts from today's Washington hearing. Finally, as the trial of Manuel Noriega nears its end, we update the U.S. case against the Panamanian dictator.
Part of helping the world live and communicate better is keeping it well informed. That's why funding for the MacNeil-Lehrer NewsHour is provided by AT&T and by PepsiCo. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and viewers like you.
The government finally got John Gotti today. A jury in New York City convicted the mob boss on all counts of murder, racketeering, gambling, loan sharking, obstruction of justice, bribery, and tax fraud. It was the fourth time the federal government brought him to trial. The first time a key witness refused to testify against him. He was acquitted twice after that. One of his murder victims was Gambino crime family boss Paul Castellano. His death in 1985 cleared the way for Gotti to take control of that mafia family. Gotti now faces a maximum of 3 life terms plus 105 years in prison. A co-defendant was also convicted today of murder and racketeering. Lawyers for both said they would appeal. Robin?
The State Department today cleared Israel of charges it had supplied China with U.S. Patriot missile technology. A 17-member team of U.S. officials visited Israel to investigate the allegations, which were made public in recent newspaper reports. State Department spokeswoman Margaret Tutwiler had this to say.
Those who leaked intelligence reports owe both the United States government and the Israeli government an apology. Our team found no evidence that Israel had transferred a Patriot missile or Patriot missile technology. We plan no further action on this question with Israel and consider the matter closed.
18 Palestinians were wounded today by Israeli gunfire in the occupied Gaza Strip. The Palestinians were protesting a bloody clash with Israeli troops yesterday. That one left 4 Palestinians dead and more than 50 wounded. UN officials said the Israelis opened fire in a crowded refugee market after they were attacked with firebombs. PLO officials today demanded United Nations protection for Palestinians living in the occupied territories. State Department spokeswoman Tutwiler said Israel and the Arab countries have agreed to a 5th round of peace talks. They'll be held in Washington starting April 27th. She also said the countries have submitted lists of possible cities for a 6th round of talks, expected to be held closer to the region.
Protesters firebombed the Venezuelan embassy in Tripoli, Libya today and demonstrated outside other embassies. The unrest was aimed at countries which approved UN sanctions against Libya 2 days ago. We have a report narrated by Richard Vaughn of Worldwide Television News.
The Italian embassy in Tripoli was one of several targeted by the protesters. Demonstrators flooded into the city in convoys of cars and buses. Some appeared to be given a police escort. The demonstration was noisy, but never violent, unlike those at the Russian and Venezuelan missions. But unlike those countries, Italy is not a member of the UN Security Council that imposed the sanctions. It appears that their mission was targeted because the Italians represent British business interests. Britain spoke out strongly in favor of sanctions and voted for them, but it has no functioning embassy in the country. America was instrumental in having the measures passed. Its embassy is slowly falling into disrepair. The Belgians now handle American interests. They, like the Italians, were besieged by protesters.
The U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Thomas Pickering, called those attacks outrageous. The Security Council met an emergency session this afternoon to strongly condemn them and to order Libya to prevent any more from happening. It also demanded Libya pay for the destruction of Venezuela's embassy.
Defense Secretary Dick Cheney today said the U.S. was pleased by a new plan from Russia to sharply reduce its armed forces. The plan was presented to Cheney by Boris Yeltsin's top military advisor earlier this week. Under it, the Russian forces would be cut by more than half to about 1.2 million members. The forces would also abandon their attack posture and switch to a much more defensive mode. Meanwhile, Yeltsin's top economic advisor was sacked today. Yegor Gaidar was the main architect of Russia's free market reforms. He lost his job as finance minister after public criticism of those reforms. Yeltsin later said he was not planning a retreat from Russia's transition to a free market economy. Public anger over that transition spilled onto the streets of St. Petersburg today. Thousands of demonstrators protested against a decree that will break up many state enterprises. The protesters said that it would only add to already high unemployment.
In U.S. economic news, first-time claims for unemployment benefits rose for a second week in a row. The Labor Department said 456,000 claims were filed last week. In another report, orders to U.S. factories were up. The Commerce Department said orders for both durable and non-durable goods rose 0.5% in February. The House Ethics Committee last night released the names of 22 past and present members who repeatedly wrote bad checks at the House Bank. The release raised the tension level at today's weekly meeting of House Democrats. Congressman Robert Torricelli of New Jersey said it was very rough, as tense a session as he'd ever seen. We'll talk with House Speaker Tom Foley about the bank scandal and other issues right after this news summary.
The space shuttle Atlantis returned to Earth this morning. It landed at the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, Florida. The 7 astronauts on board spent 9 days photographing and studying the Earth's atmosphere. Scientists hope the research will reveal more about global warming and ozone depletion.
The Prime Minister of France resigned today. Edith Cresson was the first woman to ever hold that office, and she held it for just 10 months. Her governing Socialist Party had suffered several recent election defeats. She was replaced today by the country's finance minister.
In this country's politics, the final results from the main Democratic presidential caucuses are in, and the winner is Jerry Brown. Unofficial returns from the February caucuses had given the state to former Massachusetts Senator Paul Tsongas by less than 1 point. But some local officials were slow to return their paperwork, and the final tally today went to Brown by 1.4%. That's our summary of the news. Next, a newsmaker interview with Speaker Tom Foley, the return of TB, and the case against Noriega.
The Speaker of the House of Representatives, Tom Foley, is first tonight. He presides over an institution caught in a political and public storm over kited checks at the House Bank, irregularities at the House Post Office, and other allegations about perks and mismanagement. Polls show public confidence in Congress to be at an historic low. Surveys conclude its members are out of touch. Insider Washington stories say Republicans are looking for a villain, Democrats for a scapegoat, and Tom Foley, who came to the House of Representatives 27 years ago as the representative from the 5th District of the state of Washington, may be it for both. He is with us now for a newsmaker interview. Are you feeling like a scapegoat, Mr. Speaker?
No, it's a challenging time for the House, for the country. There are issues that the public has been concerned about for some time. There are issues that we're trying to address in the Congress. Economic issues, the problems of recession and lack of growth in our economy, the problems of health care, the problems of dealing with our education, our infrastructure, of crime. Those things are the preoccupation of the country and the preoccupation, frankly, of the members. Recently, there have been concerns about the operation of the House Bank and Post Office, as you mentioned. And we are setting those things right. I just sworn in a postmaster, the executive assistant to the Postmaster General of the United States, who will place the post office under the best of management. We are working now with Republicans in a bipartisan task force to bring forth next week a new organization of non-legislative services at the House. So all the support services that serve the House of Representatives will be put under the best and most appropriate management. And then we want to get back to the issues that people elected the Congress to deal with, not with the internal management of the House, but with the great issues that the country faces. And I think that's the frustration many members have. They want to deal with those issues that the country wants them to deal with.
How do you assess your own responsibility for these problems in the bank and the post office?
Well, if we go back to the time that I was sworn in in the summer of 1989. In December of that year, I was approached by the Comptroller General, asked for an appointment, and told me that at that time that he had concern about the operation of the House Bank, and told me in particular that he had concern about the then Sergeant-at-Arms cashing checks in the House Bank and other employees. He was more focused on check overdrafts or insufficient fund checks by employees of the House than by members. But I immediately informed the leaders in both parties. I called the Sergeant-at-Arms in. He promised to take immediate action. Within 2 days' time, he wrote a letter promising a restructuring of the bank procedures to the Comptroller General's deputy. And 1 week after we came back into session, December we were out of session, on January 31st, he wrote to me, the Sergeant-at-Arms, a complete statement of new procedures and new written procedures. All of this had been worked out with the General Accounting Office and with private banking consultants. We thought we had this problem resolved.
But this did not touch on the issue of members writing
yes,
checks.
It had at that point in January procedures both for restricting overdrafts by members as well as those who might otherwise use the bank. You have to understand this institution is a very old one. The House Bank is really somewhat of a misnomer. It's a payroll office that started in existence in 1838 and for a number of years had the policy of allowing members of Congress who are paid at the end of the month rather than at the beginning of the month. They're paid, in other words, for work they've already performed rather than for work they're about to perform, to draw on their next month's salary. And so they did, in fact, permit overdrafts. This has been going on for at least 50 years, up to the level of the next month's salary. And because of that practice, the bank was not efficient in recording members' deposits on time in many cases. I don't make any excuses for the operation of the bank, but if we go back to 1954, the last Republican speaker was faced with exactly the same recommendations by the General Accounting Office. He chose to do nothing about it. I took action which I thought was corrective and which would lead to a solution to the problem. Unfortunately, after that action in January of 1990, the procedures that I thought and the General Accounting Office thought had been carried out by the bank, and assurances were given that they were being carried out, were in fact not being carried out. And those existing practices that were supposed to be corrected were in fact not corrected. And a year later, when the General Accounting Office did its next audit of the bank, they had to come forward and say that they thought that there had obviously been a failure to implement those instructions which we had been assured had been given. And at that point, the controversy reached the public dimension, and the bank was ordered closed last October, and the Sergeant-at-Arms has since resigned.
Do you believe that the public reaction to this is right on target?
I think the public reaction is understandable but mistaken. For example, many people think that public money was involved. None was. Many people think that the taxpayers somehow were covering members' checks. They weren't. The members who deposited their payroll checks in this so-called bank were the ones that were carrying the burden of any overdrafts from any other member. They were also not paid any interest on their accounts, which is typical of modern banking practices. So the members were not trading on the public's money. No taxpayers' losses resulted from this, no actual losses to anyone. But the practice is difficult to defend in a modern circumstance. And that, for that reason, it was decided last October that we should order the bank closed and order the Ethics Committee to review the individual accounts of members to determine whether any other further action should be taken.
Do you personally now believe that the practice of allowing members to write overdrafts for no fees, etc., was in fact wrong?
I think it was a mistaken policy. I think what we should have had is a system similar to commercial banking operations where members could deposit their salary checks or make other deposits and be paid interest for them as they would be in a normal bank, and then to have overdraft protection if they wrote above their accounts and pay interest on that as they do in a normal bank. What should have happened, and I hope, in looking at other aspects of the bank, of the House operations, we can see that this is the standard of the future, that there be no special or unique circumstances for members of Congress in dealing with their life in Capitol Hill that aren't related to their jobs that the so-called, special privileges, if one wants to think of this as a special privilege, simply be eliminated unless it has some immediate relevance to doing the job.
And now, isn't that the heart of the issue? Isn't that what's really caused the public reaction, the allegation that you all were so out of touch with the rest of the country that you didn't realize that you thought you were entitled to this, and it never occurred to you there was anything wrong?
I think there was a thought that members had when they came in that this was a practice that had been going on for decades, for generations, that it was balanced, if you wish, by the fact that members didn't get any interest on their accounts, that it was not something that was seen as some tremendous privilege or other. The notion that somehow comes out of some of these discussions, that the members of the House of Representatives or the Senate are living a peculiar and removed life of luxury and privilege, totally different than the experience that members have. This is one of the hardest working jobs I know in government. The people who come to Congress come of their own choice, and they don't have any apology to make to anybody for holding this office. They seek it. But it's a 7-day-a-week job. It involves travel back to their districts. Overwhelmingly, they are people of not only the highest integrity, but the hardest working commitment to the constituents that send them to Congress. This view of some kind of removed and isolated and privileged community is totally false. It's just a false image.
That I'm sure you're aware of the poll, the CBS New York Times poll that just came out today, in fact, said that only 17% of the people approved of the job the Congress was doing. And a third of those people thought that, a third thought that 1/3 of the members of the House and Senate were financially corrupt. That's the public perception of you and your colleagues.
That, to some extent, is a sad truth because it is not true. The perception does exist. The reality does not. As I say, looking at it from the experience of a member who served for 27 years in the Congress, it is astounding to me that the public would think that members in large numbers are corrupt. And I think that ought to be put against the fact that they don't think that about their own members. The person that they know best, the person that they have elected or their community citizens have elected, they think is a person of honor and nobility, if not nobility perhaps, but honor and hard work and honesty. And that's what's reflected in these polls as well. It's the other people, those that they do not elect, that serve in other districts, that there's great doubt about. And that's a problem for the institution as a whole. But very frankly...
Isn't it more than just a problem? Isn't it a crippling...
Well, I hope it doesn't become a crippling fact. I don't want to diminish the fact that I'm very sad to see these results, and I don't believe they reflect any kind of reality of the institution. But to put it in some context, Congress is an anonymous institution for people. When you talk about the presidency, that means George Bush. Now, even the president doesn't get approval figures in the 50% level or above for his handling of the economy or the job from time to time. But the Congress is not immediately personalized for people because it's 435 House members and 100 senators. The most relevant question is, where do they think of their own representative? Where do they think the person, man or woman, Republican or Democrat, that serves as their representative in Congress? And by very substantial polling all over the country, people still think highly and still favorably of their representative.
It's been said on this program and elsewhere since all of this broke on the bank thing that the bank thing is just the last of many things, that there was already this negative perception of the Congress of the United States. It's been fed by all kinds of things, even by members themselves. Some of the most severest critics are from the Senate and the House themselves. Senator Warren Rudman announced last week he wasn't going to run for re-election. He was questioning whether or not, as a senator of from the New Hampshire, he was part of the problem instead of the solution.
Well, Warren Rudman's a man I admire very much. He's a Republican, I'm a Democrat, but I think he gave tremendous service in the Senate. He said at the same time that he thought while he was frustrated, he wasn't impossibly frustrated. And there are tough problems we've been dealing with. Senator Rudman dealt with those problems as I and others did over the deficit, over the budget agreement and other areas. And I think when he honestly said that the problems have had, in his judgment, an assessment of responsibility for the President as well as the Congress, for the former President as well as the present Congress, for Democrats and Republicans together. We are facing some difficult choices in the country. Those choices aren't easy in a time of economic recession and pressure. And we understand, I think everyone who serves in Congress understands the pain and the anxiety and the frustration that Americans feel. One of the charges that I would say not guilty to is the charge that members of Congress are out of touch. Of all the people that represent legislatures around the world, members of the House and Representatives in the Senate are the most in touch. They travel back to their districts, they meet with their constituents, they're available in Washington to them. We have a tradition of that goes back a very long time. And that's the reason, I think, that when people look at their own representative or senator, they take a totally different view than when they deal with the institution. Why is the institution in so much disrespect as it sometimes appears to be? For one, it's the anonymous institution. Secondly, it's been a butt of criticism and jokes even, going back to the foundation of the country. The important thing to remember, however, is that the Congress is the fundamental institution of American democracy. Other countries have presidents, even presidents they elect. But the unique element of the American democracy is the fact that we send representatives and senators to Washington to be an equal branch of government, to be a separate and equal branch of government, and to represent the people's interests and concerns. And I think that's what we're trying to do. And they are owed an explanation about these recent reports about the post office and about the House bank. I think they can be given if the public will listen. I don't defend the continuation of the House bank as an institution. In fact, I and others recommended that it be closed last fall. And it's unfortunate that the things that I put in motion, along with the General Accounting Office, were not accomplished to deal with the problem earlier. But we are going to correct those problems, in any that remain, in the management of the House of Representatives. We're going to deal with any kind of so-called perquisites of office other than those that are required by the job itself. And then we're going to do the legislation that needs to be done in health, in education, in the problems of crime, in the problems of energy, in the problems of the economy of this country. And that's what people got elected to do, not to be a management committee for the House of Representatives.
Back to you for a few moments, in a more personal way. A unnamed leading Democrat in the House was quoted in one of your home state newspapers in Seattle today as saying that maybe your wife Heather should step aside as your unsalaried chief of staff, that might help clear the air. What do you think about that piece of advice?
Well, I don't, frankly, think it's good advice. My wife Heather has served as my chief of staff for over 20 years, and she's served with extraordinary capacity and distinction, and been a wonderful assistance to me in all my responsibilities as a member of Congress, as a member of leadership. She is a lawyer. She's qualified to carry on this responsibility. The only difference is she's not paid. And that decision was taken a long time ago when we could have had a situation where she could have joined my staff before we were married and continued to be paid under the statutes of the United States afterwards. But we made the decision that she shouldn't do that, and she served all of this time with great qualification and distinction, in my judgment. And to point to my wife as some kind of mistake on my part in making her chief of staff, I just don't accept. And I think it would be wrong entirely to suggest that she should step aside. I'm not going to do that. I take the responsibility for all of my staff, the chief of staff and every person on the staff, and I have no interest or desire to make any other choice.
There are an increasing number of stories, some today again, that the day may come when these leading Democrats in the House of Representatives may come to you and say, Mr. Speaker, you're a terrific guy, you've done a great job, but if we don't do something, we're all going to go down the tubes in November. For the good of the institution, and the good of the party, and for the good of all of us in this room, would you step aside? Have you picked up any whiffs of that?
No, not at all. A member of the Democratic Party was on the floor today and suggested that I not run again for Speaker next year. And my answer to that is that I intend to run again for Congress and for Speaker, but my preoccupation is with doing the job I have now. I'm the Speaker of this Congress, and I'm dealing with the problems that face this Congress. And I'm determined that this Congress has two characterizations by the time it concludes this fall. One of it's a reform Congress. I believe that, difficult though the path has been, we are going to establish important and significant reforms in the way the House is managed. And secondly, that we have continued to face the problems that the country needs faced and dealt with, the problems, as I say, of energy and health, and those things that people talk about over the dinner table. Sure. Not whether this or that arrangement is made in the House post office where this person or that person have this responsibility. But we're going to restore absolute integrity and management of the highest order, I hope with bipartisan support, and then we're going to do the public's business. Now, in the future, if someone came to me and said, for the good of the party, would you step aside? If I thought that leaving the Speaker's office would create an opportunity for the party and the country to improve the operations and reputation of the House, I wouldn't hesitate. But I don't think that's what's needed at this time. I think it's my responsibility to do the job I was elected to do, and to carry on the responsibilities and move away, hopefully in a way that brings public confidence to the House, move away from these problems of the past and look to the future.
As I said in the introduction, you've been here 27 years, and you've seen these kinds of situations come where focus goes on a particular individual, and then their stories and the smell of blood comes and all of that. Are you feeling that at all, that you've got a certain periods you've got to get through, or it's going to be tough at the, you don't see daylight here, or do you see daylight?
No, I'm perfectly confident of what I'm doing. I'm not in a state of terror or excitement or anything else. You're right that in Washington sometimes there's a sort of blood in the water rumor that goes around, and everybody says, you know, is he going to last a week, or is he going to last 2 days, or is the announcement coming tomorrow? The old Mark Twain thing, rumors of my imminent death, are grossly exaggerated. I'm comfortable with the responsibility that I've been given in a difficult time. And when the water gets rough, you have to expect this criticism and complaint. But I think I have very strong support in the Democratic caucus. And I presume to think that I have the respect of members on both sides of the aisle in the Congress. What we need to do together is to repair the reputation of the House, which has been damaged to some degree, there's no question, and to restore beyond that the sense of the American people of the truth, which is that they are represented by people of both parties of integrity and goodwill and hard work who want to do the business they were elected to do and have a great honor in the opportunity to do it.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much.
Still ahead on the NewsHour, tuberculosis comes back, and Noriega soon faces the jury. Next, the return of an old scourge, tuberculosis. After decades of steady decline, the number of TB cases in this country has increased alarmingly. Correspondent Elizabeth Brackett explains why.
This is a fight to the finish, and man is going to win this fight. Goodbye, Mr. Germ. I see the day when tuberculosis will be licked. I see happy, healthy children growing up without the fear that their lives will be ruined by it.
Judged by today's standards, this 1940s public service film may seem a bit hokey. But in fact, there was genuine cause for optimism. Tuberculosis, the great scourge of the 19th century, was on the wane. Public health measures had helped control the spread. TB sanatoriums offering rest, a balanced diet, and plenty of fresh air had dramatically cut the death toll. Some of the prescribed regimens, sending partially dressed children to play in the snow, for example, may have defied common sense. But patients were willing to endure almost anything to be cured. By 1945, new antibiotics offered real hope that TB would soon be a horror of the past.
And when we are all grown up, our children are not going to get tuberculosis. Are they, Daddy?
No, indeed, my dear.
Unfortunately, Daddy was wrong. The end to the tuberculosis threat was within reach. But now it's back. several cities, including Detroit, Philadelphia, Miami, Houston, Chicago, and Los Angeles, have seen a rise in TB cases. But no city has been harder hit than New York, which had 3,520 cases in 1990, an unprecedented 38% increase over the previous year. Dr. William Rahm is chief of the chest service at New York's Bellevue Medical Center.
Over the past 2.5 or 3 years, the occasional TB patient has changed to a daily TB patient, and now we're admitting 2 or 3 or 4 every single day.
Could you tell us about the symptoms that you had that brought you to the hospital?
Yeah, I kept having this real hard, dry cough, but I couldn't spit up nothing. It was always, I get the cough, and I get out of breath. I cough so much, you know.
Clyde Beck has tuberculosis. A hacking cough, coupled with night sweats and fevers, are common symptoms of the disease. A disease which, in its active state, eats away at lung tissue, but can also lie dormant and harmless for years, even a lifetime.
These individuals incessantly cough, and the organisms are spread rapidly throughout the room. The aerosol dries, and these droplet nuclei, as they are referred to, remain airborne and infectious for hours to days.
Experts say that under normal circumstances, healthy individuals would have to be exposed to the bacteria for months to contract TB. But that's not the case with high-risk groups, namely the homeless, prisoners, intravenous drug users, and those infected with the AIDS virus. Those who have the virus are especially at risk, accounting for roughly half of New York's TB cases. Beck has the misfortune to be both homeless and infected with AIDS.
Have you been exposed to anybody who had tuberculosis?
I really don't know. I'll be exposed to so many people sometime. I don't know who they are.
No one can say for sure where Beck got infected, but one strong possibility is a homeless shelter like this one. Health officials say such places provide an ideal breeding ground for TB, just as the tenements and sweatshops did a century ago.
Okay, do you want to turn this way a little bit? Okay.
In a healthy individual, the chances of beating the disease are very good. A hospital stay of a few days to 2 weeks, and then 6 to 18 months on antibiotics usually does the trick. But most of Dr. Rahm's patients have the AIDS virus and face a lot tougher fight. Much depends on whether they continue taking their medicine. Many patients don't, and therefore develop more virulent strains of the disease. Dr. Jay Dobkin, director of the AIDS program at New York's Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, studied discharged TB patients and found that 90% of them discontinued treatment.
Just as in a laboratory, you can create drug-resistant strains by temporarily exposing them to the drug and then letting them grow again. That's exactly what happens in patients. They're treated for a few weeks, they stop, treated for another few weeks and stop, and you can predictably get resistance to virtually any of the drugs we have. And that's exactly what's been going on.
An alarming 34% of New York City's TB patients have bacteria resistant to one or more drugs. If the resistance is to multiple drugs, the disease is frequently fatal, especially in AIDS patients. Dr. Dobkin says the increase of multi-drug resistant cases could have been prevented if the city had heeded various warnings and done a better job assuring that discharged patients continued therapy.
I think it's very important for people to understand that these multi-drug resistant TB strains did not come from Mars. These are the creation of the failure of the public health control system. They would not exist were it not for this phenomenon of repeated episodes of failed therapy.
The problem is New York simply doesn't have the resources. As the number of TB cases diminished over the years, federal funding for tuberculosis dropped, and New York basically dismantled its TB facilities. New York City's acting commissioner for public health is Dr. Margaret Hamburg.
In 1968, we had close to 24 clinics for tuberculosis diagnosis and treatment. Now our number is down to 10. In 1968, we had 1,000 beds that were dedicated for tuberculosis. Today, we have tuberculosis patients in our hospitals in large numbers, but scattered throughout the hospitals, and without the kind of dedicated service that many of those patients need, and the appropriate infection control that many of those patients need.
Years ago, health officials solved the infection control problem by isolating patients in TB sanatoriums. Bellevue housed its TB patients on an old ferry boat. The sanatoriums are all closed now, and the spread of infection is a major worry, not only for patients, but for healthcare workers as well. Bellevue has had 2 of its staff contract the disease.
Any idea how you caught it?
Specifically, no. I'm assuming it's from a patient that I had some contact with within the last year, but I can't be more specific than that.
Susan Weiss is fortunate. Her TB is the simple, treatable kind. Others have not been so lucky. According to one report, 19 city health workers have contracted multi-drug-resistant TB. 6 of them have died. The same report found that at least 100 patients have contracted the disease. 65 of them, mostly patients with the AIDS virus, have died. This is a state-of-the-art infection control room at Denver's National Jewish Center of Immunology and Respiratory Medicine. It has its own air filtration system. The air passes through a ceiling vent. It's radiated with an ultraviolet light to kill bacteria, diluted with large amounts of fresh air, and then cycled back into the room. Bellevue's facilities offer a gloomy contrast.
We have a limited number of rooms that have ultraviolet lights and proper filters. We are currently in the process of improving the ventilation in the rooms to meet the standards, but in our public hospital, as in many, we don't have the resources to have the proper accommodation for TB patients.
New York City's public hospitals also fall short in testing to determine whether a patient has active TB and whether it's drug resistant. This lab, again at Denver's National Jewish Center, can turn the test around within 2 weeks. Doctors at Bellevue have to wait 12 weeks or more. The delay, especially in the case of AIDS patients, can be fatal.
Okay, can you say 99?
99.
Again?
99.
New York's health commissioner says they're aware of all the problems, and they're doing the best they can given their limited resources.
Okay, very good.
Solutions can be achieved, but it will require commitment at every level. We need federal, state, city commitment to tuberculosis control, and we need to do it now.
In response to such calls, the Bush administration has requested $66 million for tuberculosis control in 1993. That's more than double this year's spending, but far short of the $90 million per year the American Lung Association estimates is needed to control the disease.
At a congressional hearing in Washington today, Dr. William Roper, director of the Federal Centers for Disease Control, talked about how much money his agency needed to fight TB. New York Congressman Ted Wise asked Roper why the Bush administration had not fully funded previous budget requests.
What kind of reaction was there really at the presidential level? Didn't they believe what you and your people were suggesting to them and submitting to them and requesting of them?
The requests in 89, 90, that period, were requests to mount an additional effort to eliminate a problem that we thought was on the wane in this country.
Right, but then you weren't getting it. Yeah.
May I finish my answer? The problem that we began noticing late in 1990 and surely in 1991 was that tuberculosis was increasing significantly, especially multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. And so the tenor of our requests changed from we need this money to go ahead and eliminate fully a long-standing, indeed ancient problem, changed to we have a major series of outbreaks of a problem that is not going away, indeed is increasing. And whereas we've gone from an activity that competed with a lot of others that were important, worthy activities to being an emergency that merits special attention now.
for whatever reason, the executive branch, policymakers, numbers people, if you will, had not as urgent a sense of the problem as you did or as Congress did. And the question again is, what were you in a position to make a public appeal and a public objection, if you will?
My predecessor as director of CDC put forward a plan, a strategic plan to eliminate tuberculosis in early 1989, and that became the basis for a wide-scale effort to mobilize the nation against tuberculosis. We've made progress. Now, however, we need to make much more progress because of the multi-drug resistant problem.
The President requested a total of $66 million for TB activities in fiscal 93. That's the total amount. And yet the Urban Caucus, which I'm a member of, and the chairman is a member of, along with Congressman Payne and Shays, who sit on this committee, they recommended increasing that amount to about $100 million. What's your view? Do you feel that $66 million is enough?
I think it's going to take more than that to deal quickly with the problem.
Mm-hmm.
We are at the present time looking carefully at what our judgment is, given the changing nature of the epidemic, and I don't have a firm number for you right now.
Mm-hmm. And let me just ask you to follow up the chairman saying, what are you prepared to do to see that number goes up?
I'm prepared to do what I did to get the fiscal 93 president's budget number up, which is push very hard, first within our department and then OMB and the White House, to acquaint people there with the problem as they are now acquainted, so that the dollars will flow as they have.
Also today, the CDC released new statistics that suggest the sharp rise in new TB cases was beginning to slow down, except in New York City.
And now we turn to the 7-month drug trafficking and racketeering trial of former Panamanian leader Manuel Noriega. The trial is almost over. The defense is wrapping up closing arguments, and the case will go to the jury tomorrow. We'll have some analysis of the case after this background. Manuel Antonio Noriega was indicted in 1988, but it took a military invasion of his homeland a year later to turn that indictment from a piece of paper into an active drug case. 24 American soldiers and several hundred Panamanians died in the fighting. Governments throughout Latin America condemned it as a violation of international law. Nevertheless, 2 weeks after the invasion began, U.S. lawmen had their quarry. He arrived in Miami aboard a C-130 military transport, handcuffed, surrounded by federal drug agents, with demonstrators in attendance. The trial itself began last fall after 20 months of pretrial disputes over evidence. From day one, Noriega wore his military uniform in court, in accordance with his insistence that he's a prisoner of war, not an ordinary criminal. Federal prosecutors disagree. They maintain this is just another drug case that happens to have a very important defendant. There are 10 charges, all of them relating to drug smuggling and racketeering. Collectively, they paint a picture of a corrupt military leader who took money to let Colombian cocaine traffickers use Panama as a base for shipping drugs to the United States. The government presented 3 months of testimony, including a parade of former drug smugglers and money launderers as witnesses. One key witness was Carlos Lehrer, one of the leaders of the Medellin cocaine cartel and the highest-ranking Colombian drug dealer imprisoned in the U.S. Lehrer testified that Noriega protected his drug-running operations through Panama for years in return for a cut of the profits. But some outside observers said Lehner's testimony was weakened by lack of documentation or any independent corroboration. Noriega's defense team was headed by Frank Rubino, a prominent drug lawyer in Miami. The team first dropped hints about calling officials as high up as George Bush and Oliver North to show that this was international politics disguised as a court case. That never happened. Instead, Noriega's lawyers tried to present their client as an ally in the American struggle against drug trafficking. One witness, a former CIA operative, said Noriega served as a liaison between Washington and Fidel Castro for 15 years. The prosecution admitted Noriega met with Castro, but disputed his role in helping the United States. Noriega faces a sentence of well over 100 years if convicted on all counts. But observers note that undisputed facts in the case have been few and far between. Time magazine correspondent Kathy Booth has been in the courtroom throughout the trial, and she joins us from Miami. Ms. Booth, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
As the case goes to the jury, how does the case against Noriega look?
Well, actually, we have one final moment tomorrow morning where we get the government to finally give us a rebuttal case against the defense closing arguments today. So the government's got one final chance to make their case look good. The final arguments have been enlightening because the government's case, frankly, until the last minute, looked a little scattered, but they managed to bring it all together in the end, centering it, as you noted, on Carlos Lehrer. Now, the defense today has spent the last 2 days, has spent the last 2 days knocking holes in them. Pretty big holes if you believe in what they say. Most of the testimony, of course, as they pointed out, has been circumstantial, without corroboration, and you have to remember that most of these, that at least half of their witnesses were convicted dope dealers, and about a third or a fourth of them actually got deals with reduced sentences.
Mm-hmm. So what happened? Did you finish? I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
What happened to the administration case then that took so long to prepare?
With the government's case?
Yeah, the government's case.
Well, they think they have a brilliant case. And in a conspiracy case, you can use circumstantial evidence. But what the jury will do with that, and whether they believe them, whether you believe a group of men who've been convicted for dope dealing, I'm not so sure the jury's going to buy that. We'll have to wait and see. The government believes they have an airtight case, but again, it's built on people like Carlos Lehrer, who, for your audience, he's one of the 9 cartel members. He's a man who's been convicted of bringing 3.3 tons of cocaine into the United States. He's a man who went on TV once and said that cocaine would be the Achilles heel of American imperialism, and he was an avowed Hitler believer. Now he comes, testifies for the government that Manuel Noriega oversaw every bit of cocaine that went through his country, that he helped launder money, that he gave passports to Colombian drug dealers. Who do you believe? You know, it's hard to, without any corroboration. Carlos Lehrer never met Manuel Noriega, despite the fact that Noriega, according to other witnesses, was in Medellin at the Ochoa cartel headquarters. And Carlos Lehrer was there, but he never saw him. Do you believe him?
Reading about this today, I've been surprised by the number of things the jury has been told to disregard. Could you just tell us some of the things they've been told you're not supposed to think about?
Well, the prime one, of course, is the fact that it's not a political case. It is only a drug case. They have been told to ignore the fact that he worked for the U.S. government, that he provided information to the CIA, the DIA. He was paid by them. Of course, the jury does not know that he was paid $300-something thousand by our government. But the main thing's been the political. This is not a political trial. The judge has said time and again, and every time the defense has tried to bring that in, he's been overruled. So that will, in fact, be one of his final instructions. On the other hand, it's interesting to note that the prosecution, one of the last things they brought up, it was very interesting. They have been saying all along, this is only a drug case. So one of the last things they pointed out was that Manuel Noriega was a military dictator. And that as a military dictator, he knew everything that was going on in that country. Well, as Mr. Rubino, in his closing arguments today, went over and he grabbed, in a very emotional moment, he grabbed the general, made him stand up in front of the courtroom. He said, you know, what are you going to convict this man of being a military dictator or for being a drug trafficker? You can convict him of being a military dictator, but can you convict him of being a drug trafficker? And that's going to be the leap of faith the jury will have to make.
For instance, I read that the jury was told to disregard any discussion of plea bargains or deals having been made with some of the convicted drug dealers who were witnesses. Now,
well,
does all this begin to add up negatively in the jury's mind after a while?
Well, in fact, I mean, the prosecution told them to ignore it, that the people, that you can't make a drug case. And they're right. I mean, they're right. You cannot make a drug case against someone of Manuel Noriega's stature without people who are actually doing the drug dealing. But of course the defense came back and said, you know, I'm sorry, but you have to judge whether these people are telling you the truth or not. And in doing that, you have to look at what these people have to gain by testifying. And the prosecution went down a list of 18 people who'd been given deals. The defense went down a list of 21 that they discovered had made deals. These are people who were facing life plus 135 years who now face sentencing after this trial is over with recommendations from the government to get a 10-year cap on their sentence. These are people who have been offered witness protection. They've been given their pilot's licenses back. Their families have been brought from Colombia, Panama, and given green cards. Let's see, what other things have they been given?
But the jury's been told to disregard all that.
No, the prosecution told them to disregard that. The defense has told them they must consider this. The judge, we do not know what the judge will tell them tomorrow when he goes through his final instructions.
Finally,
but I don't think they could ignore it, frankly.
Right. Finally, is it conceivable to you and the others covering the trial that Noriega could get off?
You know, who knows what the jury's thinking at this point. As a human being, you know, they've presented 3 months of testimony, 60 people against Noriega, and you begin to wonder, well, at a certain point, you know, this man must be guilty. The government would not have brought him here and put him on trial and put 60 people against him. On the other hand, like we said before, much of the evidence is circumstantial without corroboration, and in the end, they may not believe it.
Mm-hmm. Well, Kathy Booth, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Finally tonight, essayist Roger Rosenblatt has some thoughts about normal life.
When normal life is attacked by something terrible, the nature of normality is shaken to the roots. And what's exposed, specifically, is that normality is an extraordinary achievement. A commuter flight to Cleveland. What could be more normal? A short, easy hop from New York City, hardly considered worth mentioning in itself, among the plans of the passengers for the activities of the following morning, and the business of the upcoming week, and the continuation of routine events and ceremonies, all as normal to a life as a commuter flight to Cleveland. And then that crash off the runway. And then the stammering descriptions of the onlookers at the airport. And then the rescue workers foraging in the black, freezing water. And then the daylight, and the pictures of the plane broken like an old pencil. And then the count of the numbers living and the numbers dead. And then the waiting for news of loved ones. And then the relief, or the grief. First sudden, then everlasting. "We're just normal people," said one of the survivors. "Things like this don't happen to us." Of course, things like this do happen to us, usually to us. What is shocking about events like plane crashes is that they reveal how hard-won normal lives are, how difficult it has been to earn the state of being that is contained in routines and ceremonies. A morning coffee, a walk in the park, a commuter flight to Cleveland. Truth is, we feel less surprised when mishaps befall supernormal people. Magic Johnson is exposed to the AIDS virus. Michael Landon's cancer. Somehow the high-wire nature of supernormal lives seems to live in conjunction with exceptional circumstances. Whereas with just plain folks, the idea, the wish, is that they have created lives protected from exceptional circumstances, especially trouble. Consider, though, the effort, the amazing, relentless effort that goes into making a normal life. To acquire a normal life. A marriage, a family, friends, a job. To keep a normal life. The constant touching up and repairs required of a marriage, a family, friends, a job. Examine your neighborhood, your city block. It is a factory, a sweatshop in constant motion, roaring in its dull silences, its boring schedules. The breakfast at a certain hour, the morning paper, the children off to school, you off to work. Inside these civilized structures, there are worlds so fragile and messed up, it is a wonder the worlds exist at all. Yet they are called normal. That, I think, is the heart of the shock that hits when all the normalities come crashing down. The realization of how much extraordinary, unaverage, unnormal labor it took to build up the normalities in the first place. The normal life sustains itself on exceptional momentum. When the forward motion of that life is abruptly reversed, when the brakes are slammed to the floor, when that which was revving up to fly suddenly does not fly, and you are expected home and do not arrive, then one appreciates that the routine events and ceremonies of a life are its monumental achievements. It is an unacknowledged miracle that we are able to get breakfast, read the paper, pack the kids off to school, go off to work, and return home at night to watch the news and learn of the crash of a commuter flight to Cleveland. Then comes the horror and the gasp. There is no solace for such moments except self-protective forgetfulness. And only those directly touched by either loss or survival know that nothing normal was ever normal and will never be thought normal again. I'm Roger Rosenblatt.
Again, the major stories of this Thursday. A jury in New York City convicted mob boss John Gotti of murder, racketeering, and gambling, among other charges. A State Department investigation turned up no evidence that Israel transferred U.S. Patriot missile technology to China, and demonstrators in Libya attacked the embassies of countries which voted for UN sanctions against Libya. Good night, Robin.
Good night, Jim. That's the NewsHour for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow night with a look at the New York primary with Gergen and Shields. I'm Robert MacNeil. Good night.
Funding for the MacNeil Lehrer NewsHour has been provided by PepsiCo. PepsiCo. Part of helping the world live and communicate better.